All right, let's talk about secondary school. It is an absolute emotional roller coaster of high expectations, harsh realities, and ultimately the incredible power of perseverance. Today, we're tracing the path of a student named Daniel as he navigates his very first year at Green Hill Secondary. And honestly, this isn't just a story about academics. It's a cinematic look at growing up, facing hurdles that feel completely impossible, and discovering what you are truly capable of when you just refuse to quit. To really set the stage for Daniel's journey, I want you to consider these words from a teacher named Mr. Okello. He said, "Failure is not the end of learning. Sometimes it is the beginning." So often we view failure as this giant stop sign, right? Like a permanent label telling us we just aren't good enough. But as you'll see through Daniel's timeline, failure is actually the raw material for growth. It just requires patience, and it absolutely requires perseverance. Okay, let's dive into this part one, expectations versus reality. So Daniel honestly believed secondary school would be easy. I mean, he pictured classrooms buzzing with excitement, smiling teachers, instant best friends. You know, kind of like a coming-of-age holiday movie. But reality hit him hard. On his very first day, he stood quietly near the assembly ground, just clutching this small suitcase and a heavy metal box of books. Surrounded by loud groups in this massive, endless compound, Daniel felt completely invisible. He literally didn't know a single soul. And if the sheer scale of Green Hill Secondary compared to his primary school wasn't intimidating enough, then there were the rules. Everywhere he looked, bold, unyielding notices were plastered on the walls. No making noise, time is wealth, discipline before success. They felt way less like guidelines and a lot more like strict warnings. Add to that a really harsh encounter on his first day, where a senior student barked at him to move faster because, quote, seniors don't like slow people, and the intimidation was complete. That evening, trapped in a crowded dormitory, this deep, painful homesickness set in. He missed his mother's cooking, his sister's jokes, and just the comforting freedom of his village life. Part 2. The Mathematics Struggle. Now, to truly understand his struggle, you have to understand this sheer physical exhaustion he was dealing with. Imagine waking up at 5 a.m. in the pitch dark to take a cold water bath that literally made you shiver to your core. Mornings were just filled with teachers dictating endless notes, and prep lessons lasted late into the night. And within this grueling cycle of fatigue, one subject emerged as his absolute greatest enemy: mathematics. Every single time the math teacher walked in, Daniel's stomach tied in knots. Equations flew onto the chalkboard way faster than his exhausted brain could even process. And then came the breaking point. The teacher handed back a class test with a really stern warning that some students were not serious and were going to fail. Daniel slowly looks down at his paper. 23%. Ouch. For a student already feeling lost and exhausted, this school was absolutely devastating. As his classmates whispered and laughed, comparing marks up in the 80s, Daniel quickly folded his paper. He was just desperate to hide his shame before anyone else could see it. That night, staring blankly at his math book during prep, Daniel hit his lowest emotional point. A heartbreaking question just echoed in his mind. Am I intelligent enough for secondary school? We've all been there, right? It's a classic case of imposter syndrome, that overwhelming feeling that you just don't belong and everyone else is smarter than you. He began to retreat entirely. He avoided any class discussions, terrified of being laughed at for a wrong answer, and just slipped deeper and deeper into silence. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the shift we're about to see. Part 3, finding guidance and support. It happened one evening right outside the dormitory. Daniel was sitting alone, like he usually did by this point, when Mr. Okello gently approached him. "You always sit alone these days," Mr. Okello observed. "What exactly is troubling you?" At first, Daniel tried to brush it off with a fake smile. But Mr. Okello didn't push. He just sat beside him and offered this really profound insight, that secondary school tests patience just as much as intelligence. And finally, Daniel broke. He confessed his struggle. He said, "I study, sir, but I still fail, especially mathematics." Well, that conversation sparked some serious action. Mr. Okello didn't just offer empty comfort. He provided a structured system. First, they revised slowly. Second, they focused on just one topic at a time, which effectively lowered Daniel's cognitive load so he wasn't constantly overwhelmed by a mountain of equations. And third, Mr. Okello abandoned abstract formulas altogether, explaining concepts through real-life examples. By completely changing the approach, something miraculous happened. For the very first time, math actually started making sense to Daniel. But academic help was really only half the puzzle. Daniel also needed social support. Enter Brian. Brian was a top performer in the class, but incredibly humble. He invited Daniel to join his study group that met under a large mango tree. This wasn't some intensely competitive environment. They shared notes, they asked questions without any judgment, and they actively encouraged one another. They even laughed about difficult assignments. By joining this group, Daniel finally shed that crippling fear of embarrassment. He wasn't alone anymore. And this brilliantly illustrates how external support fuels internal discipline, helping to build a true growth mindset. With his confidence slowly returning, Daniel took total ownership of his turnaround. He started small, answering simple, safe questions in class. Then he completed his homework earlier to get ahead of the stress. Finally, he started making some real sacrifices, revising during his free time instead of catching up on sleep. The improvement wasn't an overnight magic trick. It was slow, steady, and crucially, it was real. Part 4, the midterm transformation. Let's see how this hard work pays off. Midterm examinations. The tension across the entire Green Hill campus was just palpable. Students were frantically revising everywhere. When the morning of the math paper finally arrived, Daniel sat at his desk, his hands literally trembling as he opened the exam booklet. The old fear flared up. The questions looked impossible at first glance. But then, he took a deep breath. He realized he actually recognized the topics. He didn't panic. He just put his pen to the paper and carefully solved the problems, one by one. 2 excruciatingly long weeks later, the results were pinned to the notice board. Daniel pushed his way slowly through the anxious crowd, his heart just pounding, until his eyes found his name. 68%. Compare that to that devastating 23% from the start of the term. This was an absolute victory. Sure, it wasn't the highest mark in the school, but to Daniel, it meant absolutely everything. For the first time since carrying his metal box onto that campus, he smiled with genuine pride. He had proven to himself that he could succeed. As we look at the overarching arc of Daniel's first year, the transformation is pretty stunning. At the start of the year, he was lost, afraid, and totally alone, completely convinced he wasn't intelligent enough. By the end of the year, he was confident, an active member of the debate club, and even representing his class in academic competitions. When he stood once again on that exact same assembly ground where he had first felt so small, he realized he was fundamentally stronger. School life was still tough, for sure, but the fear was gone. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. Success was never about being perfect from day one. It was entirely about the refusal to give up. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder today. If success isn't about being perfect from the beginning, but about refusing to give up, how will you face your next impossible challenge? Take Daniel's lessons, find your Mr. Akello, go sit under your mango tree, and keep pushing. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Catch you next time.